This is our 67 Triumph Daytona bobber, and yesterday we put the chain on, and we have a problem because you can see the chain hits the fender when it rotates, the tire goes. So what we're going to do is we're going to cut the fender there and there on this side so the chain clears the fender. Okay, the first step is you're going to figure out where you're going to mark on the fender where to cut out. And we're marking up here and there because we know that the chain is going to move with acceleration and deceleration. We're also going to mark right there for the bottom chain. Okay, to make the cuts in the fender, we'll have to remove the fender, but first we have to remove the tire. So what we have to do is we have to take off this brake rod, loosen the axle, then we have to push the tire forward, take off the chain, and then take off the tire. Okay, now we're removing this brake rod, unscrewing it, loosening it up. And let that go forward. And now we're going to loosen up the axle. Push the tire forward. And now we're going to take the chain off. Put that to the side. Now we're going to take the wheel off.
Our first Mr. T tech tip. It's Mr. T, sucker! Before you remove that rear tire, make sure your bike is secure, fool!
Thanks for the tip, Mr. T. Now with the bike secured, I can remove the back tire. Now that we've removed the rear tire, we have access to the bolts that are holding the fender to the frame, so now we can remove them to take off the back fender. I'm using a speed handle right now because it's just quicker and easier to use. And there's the back fender. Okay, now that we've removed the fender, we're going to make the lines for the cuts we're going to make. And to get a good radius, we're going to use something with the radius that we want to make the lines. Now you can use a piece of cardboard for a flexible straight edge for the straight lines. Okay, now we've repeated the process that I showed earlier to make the cutout parts for the top and the bottom. So now we're going to mark the top and bottom parts with an X so that we know what metal we're cutting out so we don't cut out the metal that we don't need to. We're going to cut them out with power tools. The power tools we're going to use to cut out the parts of the fender are we're going to use the angle grinder for larger cuts, and we're going to use the jigsaw for smaller precise cuts.
Hold on, fool! And now for our second Mr. T tech tip. Fool! Before you use those power tools, make sure you remove all your rings, watches, and sweet jewelry and wear eye and hearing protection. Sucker!
Thanks, Mr. T. Now we're going to cut the fender. now that we've made our cut on our fender, we're going to use an angle grinder with a sanding disc to remove any burrs, sharp edges, which is basically excess metal, as you can see here, to sand it off and make the shape that we want. After all of the cutting, grinding, and sanding, this is the finished product of the fender with all the cutouts. And now we can go and reinstall it on the bike, which is basically a reverse of taking it off. Okay, now, as you can see, as you cut it, the chain does not hit the fender anymore. After completing our work on the rear fender, we are now one step closer to completing our custom motorcycle. Now there's only one thing left to do.
Fool. The third Mr. T tech tip. Fool! This ain't no tech tip. You did real good work. With a bike like this, you almost be as cool as Clubber Lang, sucker!